Dear listeners of WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem, welcome to today's program. This is the program Innovation Unedited. This is Angelo Lampousis, your host from City College of New York, being here at the studio live with one of our honor students, Christopher Fiore, in the studio. Hello, Christopher. And also with a group of honor students who are also in the green room today with us. We're very pleased to welcome in the program John Seabrook, who is a staff writer with The New Yorker, and he is also the author of several books, including Flash of Genius and Other True Stories of Invention. Mr. Seabrook, John, welcome to today's program.
Hi, Angelo. Thank you. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, John, you have been very accommodating with us and the honors program at City College. We thank you for that. There have been a couple of times that we have highlighted your articles through The New Yorker and your other work. So if you don't mind, today we're going to do a little bit more of that, and drawing also from your one of the recent articles of yours in The New Yorker related to Sandy.
Right.
So the last, I have before me here in the studio the July 22nd issue of The New Yorker, and your article entitled The Beach Builders, Can the Jersey Shore Be Saved? And we're a little bit over the 1-year anniversary of Sandy, so I thought you would be the perfect guest for us to give us a perspective from the Jersey Shore. And from reading your article, it seems that you have your own personal experience, but also you did some, how would we call this, investigative journalism? Research, yeah. So if you could maybe take us there and share some of your insights with us.
Yeah, well, so with this story, I can talk about where it started and how it kind of developed as I was working on it.
Sure.
So it just sort of started with the idea that, beaches are movable, natural things that aren't meant to be permanent, and buildings next to beaches are permanent things that aren't meant to be movable, and they don't really go together. And Sandy kind of, for me, that it's not, Sandy isn't the first time that people have thought about that, but this is the biggest time so far. So I started with that idea, and then I kind of looked for a way to tell the story. I went and looked around, and I talked to some of the homeowners who had lost their homes and others that had not lost their homes. And the big difference was that some had dunes and some didn't have dunes. And the ones that had the dunes were saved. And then, learned that the reason they had the dunes was because the owners had all signed easements to let the Army Corps of Engineers come into their onto their property, basically, and build these dunes that would block their view of the ocean. And the communities that had gotten the people to agree to that had the dunes and were saved from the worst of the flooding. And the communities where the homeowners said, no, we don't want this dune built because it's going to block our view, were among the most damaged. And then I learned of this legal case that one particular homeowner had sued over having her view blocked, and that the lawsuit had gone all the way to the New Jersey Supreme Court. And even though the dune had saved her house, she was still suing for her lost view. So she had lost her view, but she had kept her house. Anyway, so that's it. Then when I learned that, it seemed like, okay, well, that's the way to tell this story, because you need an actual, real sort of story to tell with the characters and stuff, and then the larger issues of what should happen, what's going to happen to our beaches in the future as sea level rises could be built around that.
I was wondering what are the reasons, and this is partially a little bit philosophical, I think. We're teaching a course here through the Department of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences called Global Environmental Hazards, and that includes hurricanes, volcanoes, pretty much any hazard you can think of. And it seems that people are going back to these historically vulnerable locations, whether it's near the coastline or around a volcano or something. So we have some examples, even historic examples, of people just, like you're saying, liking the view, or sometimes there are economical reasons. For example, maybe volcanic soil is more fertile than your average soil, and there's particular farming you can do there. But
that's not the case in New Jersey. And the irony in New Jersey is actually there is not real much economic incentive to live there. The people who do live there year round tend to be kind of lower income people. It's the people with second homes who have the houses on the beach that don't even live there that own that real estate.
And then you were very interestingly, you were touching on the subject of the Jersey Shore being the first in various ways, being the first as in the notion of enjoying the beach.
Right.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, I mean, because if you look at American history in the 19th century, people didn't go to the beach. No one would have thought that it was a good thing to do because it was sort of a wild, windy, and forlorn place. But beginning in the 20th century, people started to go to the beach, and the railroads started to take them there. And the whole idea of vacation at the beach became the basic idea of a vacation. And New Jersey was, because of its proximity to New York and Philadelphia, was the first of those big beach resorts, before Florida, obviously before, sort of Hawaii and all that stuff, California, really. New Jersey was the first place with the big hotels and the casino and the boardwalk, of course. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of reckless development because people didn't really appreciate the hazards. But then once it was built, you couldn't really just abandon it. So then you have to start building bigger and bigger walls to protect it. But the thing about seawalls, which are these hard structures, is that it actually promotes beach erosion because it sort of drives the waves down into the sand, and it gouges out the sand at the base of the walls. And so, now you have these communities that were built on the beach, and they built these walls, and then they didn't have any more beach, but they're still supposed to be beach communities. And that's kind of the problem we're facing now, and have really been facing for 20 years. But most Americans don't really realize that, the Army Corps of Engineers goes in every 12 or less, 6 years, and rebuilds beaches that are eroded because of seawalls and because of all of this. That's kind of what my piece is about. Is this a sustainable practice? Because it's going to become more and more expensive. The sand is going to become harder and harder to find. You have to go further and further offshore to get it. And, actually, in parts of Florida, it is running out now. The sand nearby is running out. So, what's going to happen in the future? And how much should the government pay to maintain this illusion that, the beach is always going to be there? And interestingly, the possible next president is, Governor Chris Christie from New Jersey, who's, promoted rebuilding and has been not really talked much about climate change and what's going to happen in the long term here. It's actually going to be a really interesting issue for him because he's going to have to answer some questions.
And talking about governors, it perhaps makes sense to recall this statement by the New York State governor at last year's State of the State Union address, when he said that proposing this plan to buy out properties in Coney Island and other properties here in New York, saying that Mother Earth, doesn't visit very often, but when she does, it kind of belongs to her, this land, and we might as well return it to her instead of keep building it up. That was his statement. So from what you're saying, just estimating the resources, and based on your articles, we're talking about some large numbers in the order of billions of dollars for the U.S. Corps of Engineers and so on. It may make sense to actually just let it be, right?
It makes sense logically, but it doesn't make sense politically because no politician is going to get reelected for letting something go. Their whole reason that Chris Christie is as popular as he is because he's taken this kind of tough, we're stronger than the storm kind of stance, and he's not going to let something like Hurricane Sandy stand in his way. But ultimately, of course, if sea level rise continues, inevitably these places would have to be abandoned. And at what point is that? And there's a guy in the piece I spoke to who does sort of the economic assessment of that. It's actually kind of an interesting field in and of itself. Like, at what point does the cost of keeping the sea out become more than letting it in, and how do you calculate that? But it seems like that point was definitely going to come at some point, but when, it's not totally clear. So,
In a couple of minutes, we're going to move on to a station break here, John and dear listeners. So I would like to get in a few questions, if you don't mind, John, from your previous work, especially the book Flash of Genius and Other True Stories of Invention, because for the second half of our programming, we save time for our students to ask questions.
Okay.
And they do this by blogging in-house here using laptops and so on. So if you don't mind, on the second half, we will have some questions not only from your recent article on Sandy and the Jersey Shore, but from your other contributions as well.
Okay.
Don't touch that dial. Keep it locked on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem.
I seek to understand me, all of my impurities and evils yet unknown. I am a journalist, I write to you to show you I am an incurable and nothing else behaves like me.
Dear listeners of WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem, welcome back. This is Angelo Lampousis, your host from City College of New York, talking to John Seabrook, staff writer at the New Yorker, author of several books, including Flash of Genius and Other True Stories of Invention. Great. We can move on at this point to questions from our students. And depending on, Christopher, how many do we have more or less? I guess most frequently it goes like 1 minute per question. So let's see what can we do in the remaining little bit of time, Christopher.
Okay.
All right, sure. The first question is, can you see any parallels between Chris Christie's treatment of Hurricane Sandy and his political aspirations with former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani's treatment, fame, subsequent bid for president after 9/11?
That's kind of an interesting question. I kind of think there could be a parallel there. I mean, Rudy Giuliani kind of ran on this sort of fear-mongering platform that I think ultimately people kind of rejected for different reasons. I mean, Christie's running on a kind of it would be maybe a little extreme to say he's running on a climate change denial platform, but he's definitely not embracing climate change by any means as an issue, and that's partly because his state has a great deal to lose from climate change because of the amount of money that the tourist industry brings in to the state. So in that sense, they're both kind of founded on sort of erroneous assumptions, I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay, the next question's from Isabel Jenkins. What would diminishment of beaches, how would that affect the economy of the surrounding areas?
Well, if they don't manage the beach, then the beach goes away, and then the economy on the surrounding areas is impacted badly. So they can't really not manage the beach. But the question in my article was also partly to what extent do you manage the beach? How much do you manage the beach? And also is the government the federal government the right organization to do that? Basically, all the people who don't live anywhere near the beach in the whole United States are paying for the few people who do live near the beach to have a beach, even though it's not really natural to have a beach there, just because they have something there and they can't let it go. I mean, I'll finish quickly, but one of the big things to come out of Sandy is they changed the insurance rules. So the federal government no longer subsidizes flood insurance for beach dwellers, and it's much more expensive now to get the insurance. So that's actually going to be a disincentive on development.
Mm-hmm. Okay, our next question is from Matthew Liu. You mentioned that after some time it would not be worth saving the coastline. Can you give us a general sense of when this would happen, if this occurs?
Well, it depends on what level of where you live, sea level wise, and which coast you live on. I mean, one of the problems with the Jersey coast is not only is it very flat. Because these are barrier islands. All right, so most of the development is actually on the barrier islands, which are supposed to be the natural buffers for the mainland. But because we've stuck the things right out there on the barrier islands, there's no natural protection for that. That's just a sort of a bad place to be.
Okay, our next question is from Kari Anderson. Do you think that because of coastal environmental disasters, many urban centers on the coastline would eventually dissipate and more inland cities will expand?
I don't know. It's a good question. That is going to be because we live in a culture that people are living longer. There are more older people. There's affluence that allows you to live wherever you want. There's the internet, which allows you to work from almost, not always wherever you want, but farther away. And so there's all these kind of reasons that you can live on the beach now, if you want to. Whereas before you had to make, probably sacrifices. So it'll be interesting to see. If you go out to Malibu, that's a whole different level of wealth and development on the beach. But in California, at least they don't get like the hurricanes that we get. So they may get, some flooding from certain events, but they're not going to get they're not going to get a hit from Sandy.
Very good. We have a few more questions, but we're running out of time. And it is my sad duty to, first of all, this is not sad. We need to thank you very much, John, for being with us once again. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks. It was fun.
And we have been talking to John Seabrook, staff writer at The New Yorker and author of several books, including Flash of Genius and Other True Stories of Invention. We'd like to thank Christopher Fiore, one of our honor students, being with us in the studio, and every honor student who has been in the green room for the last half hour. And most importantly, you, our listening audience, you are tuned in to WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. This is Angelo Lampusis, your host. Stay tuned. There's very interesting radio programs following up.
touch that dial. Keep it locked on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem.